house, and if any Indian tries to stop me, I'll blast him.
You know, the only thing more pathetic than Indians on TV is Indians watching Indians on TV.
Oh, geez. Hey, what's going on? It's Ian back again for another episode of Native Film Talk. Today, Fargo. Oh yeah, Fargo. So, 1996, this movie came out, directed by Ethan and Joel Coen. So this is one of their most famous movies. Out of all the movies that they've done a ton of movies that people love. But this one was special to them because they are from Minneapolis, or a suburb of Minneapolis anyway. So they wanted to capture real Minneapolis when they were doing this movie. And so part of that was putting a native on screen. And so that's like going to be the focus down the road of this episode. But when the brothers set out to do this, they didn't set out to make a comedy. They wanted to tell a story that kind of represented the people of the area, because that's what they know. That's what they're from. You know, the insane cold, you know, people helping each other, you know, jumpstart their vehicles, help them shovel their driveways, being super friendly. They did a small documentary with the film called Minnesota Nice, just to talk about how really just the accent from that area of Minnesota, but also why everyone's so nice to each other. And that comes across in the film. And real fun fact, the film was actually supposed to be called Brainerd, because that's where the majority of the film takes place, but it didn't sound right. Brainerd, the home of Paul Bunyan. There's only like one scene in the movie that takes place in Fargo, actually. So they were just like, well, Fargo sounds better than Brainerd, so let's just call it Fargo. And one of their quotes is, you know, about the movie is, it's Siberia with family restaurants. And like Fargo winters, Brainerd winters, it's harsh and people can relate to them. So, but there's a lot of nice and cordial people there. So, you know, real quick, let me get this out of the way. With Coen Brothers movies, I feel like, I mean, there's a spectrum, of course, but I feel like there's a huge chunk of people that fall into two categories. There's people that just don't see the hype with Coen Brothers movies, aka like they don't get their tone, the storytelling. When people are like really giving it a praise and critical acclaim, they just don't get it. Example, No Country for Old Men. The ending didn't make sense to those people. Others that absolutely love Coen Brothers movies across the board, example, once again, No Country for Old Men. The ending was amazing to them. And then there's a spectrum of people, you know, across that. But I feel like there's two real major camps with the Coen Brothers movies, and everyone else is somewhere in the middle. And I love their movies personally. I love most of their movies that they've done. Some of my favorites, Raising Arizona with a young Nicolas Cage. Doesn't even look like him anymore. Big Lebowski, that's my favorite all time. Lady Killers, Burn After Reading, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, True Grit, the remake with Matt Damon and the dude, gosh, why am I blanking on his name? Jeff Bridges, and then Fargo, of course. And so, with all of those movies that I mentioned, you know, Ache Shy, the dude, you know, Brad Pitt and Burn After Reading, George Clooney and Oh Brother, you know, Rooster Cogburn and True Grit. You know, every single one of these movies has memorable characters. And oddly enough, Fargo I missed. I just never got around to it. I saw Fargo for the first time in 2020. And Shep Proudfoot apparently is one of those people's like fan favorites. And I can see why. You give an epic beating of Steve Buscemi on screen, you become memorable. You become this hero of sorts because it's so funny, that beatdown that he gives him, and it's so unexpected because Shep up to that point was just the stoic Indian. He was just quiet, gave 1-2 word answers, never made eye contact, just did enough, was a really just stoic figure. So it was really refreshing to see Shep Proudfoot on screen portrayed the way that he was. So we'll go ahead and get onto that. I will say that this was interesting to me. When I saw it, I didn't get it. I mean, I always saw the trailers growing up for this movie, but I just didn't get it when I saw the trailers, and so I think that's why I never watched it. And now watching it, I can see the detail that they put into this. I mean, Ethan Coen, in regards to Minnesota Nice, he said, polite cultures are usually the most repressed and therefore the most violent. And so that comes across in the screen, on screen. There's a lot of repressed violence. There's a lot of sabotage of plans, but it's not, it's like self-sabotage. You know, Jerry Lundegaard, I'm going to go over the cast right now. Jerry Lundegaard, William H. Macy killed it. I mean, this is probably his best, outside of Shameless, his best role ever on camera. And he just was insane. You know, he was aloof. He came off as more intelligent than he was, but he played dumb at the right times. But eventually just got in over his head, just got greedy. Didn't want the finder's fee. I don't want a finder's fee. He didn't want the finder's fee. You know, he just wanted more and more and more all the time. And we later learn in the movie that he had multiple irons in the fire, and eventually just they all came and collapsed. That house of cards came and collapsed on him. And then, so William H. Macy as Jerry Lundegaard, he actually auditioned for this 3 separate times. He wanted this role. He absolutely wanted this. And he was never called back those 3 times. Like, they auditioned in one location, and they were like, he found out they were auditioning again in New York, so he went again. Like, he felt like he was born for this role, and he was. He killed it. I see so much of Frank from Shameless in this character. I love it. Frances McDormand as Margie Gunderson, who won an Oscar and won an Academy Award for this. Steve Buscemi as Carl Showalter. Peter Stormare as Gare Grimsrud. I always struggle with that one. Grimsrud. And so he's the guy from Armageddon. That's how I remember him. Steve Buscemi, too. I mean, he's Rockhound, in Armageddon. But Peter Stormare, you know, the guy from Armageddon, if you don't remember, he was the Russian cosmonaut that was in the spaceship, the International Space Station. So when, like, Ben Affleck and company went up there, and then Ben Affleck asked him that line when they were on the asteroid, have you ever heard of Evil Knievel? No, I never saw Star Wars. That was Peter Stormare. So, and then the last person I'll talk about in the cast review, Steve Reevis as Shep Proudfoot. So he is Blackfeet from Browning, Montana, known for really this role, most famous role. I heard an interview with him when he said that the one he gets recognized on the street when he was, R.I.P. Steve Reevis, but he unfortunately passed away in 2017. But, about 4 or 5 years ago, he did an interview and he said that Shep Proudfoot is the one that got him most recognized walking around the streets of L.A. He was also in The Missing. He was in Dances with Wolves. And the one that I knew him the most from was The Longest Yard, when he was the sports commentator for the Cons versus the Guards game, when he sat up there with Chris Berman. And kudos to the Coen Brothers. They hired an actual native for this role. There's one line that I'll go over that really is the only way that you know this person is native, but they hired a native person for this. They could have hired an ethnically ambiguous person, but in 1996, they hired a native person for this role. And so hats off to the Coen Brothers for doing that. Those are all big hitter names, and ones that I mentioned, and you have a native in there, Steve Reevis. This is pretty awesome. So I'll just do a quick review over the plot, and then we'll just dive right in. So it's a true story that might not have happened. That's what they say. They say it's a true story, but really the Coen Brothers put that in there as a joke of like, let's see how long it would take the audience to really believe that this is a true story. So that way throughout the movie, they just wonder, like, did this really happen? Did this really happen? And they really all of the things that happen are true in some regard. Like they growing up, they did hear of somebody actually being killed, being pushed into a wood chipper and murdered, and like somebody's tried to hide the remains by putting their body in a wood chipper. So while this might not all be directly related to one particular true story, this is like an amalgam of true stories from their life, very much like Indian Horseman, where it's based on true events. Real quick thing I'll get out before we jump into the movie plot. What I found the most interesting thing in doing research for this movie, everything that Jerry Lundegaard says is all scripted. all of his stammers and stutters and his like every single one of those like pauses and really mannerisms, that's all scripted. None of that is improvised. Everything in the Coen Brothers movies, like they're notorious for scripting everything. There is no improv with their scripts. So everything that somebody says or does comes right from the script, which I found really interesting because you go to Shep Proudfoot scene where he beats the hell out of Steve Buscemi. Like, he's yelling every F-bomb combination you possibly can yell, and that was all scripted. None of that was improvised. So I thought that was real interesting. So I talked about how they lie and say it was a true story, and then really, so it opens up at Brainerd, at a bar in Brainerd called the Blue Ox, because this is the home of Paul Bunyan. He's delivering the car to the two people that he's going to hire to kidnap his wife, which we find out is Peter Stormare and Steve Buscemi, a.k.a. Carl and Gare. So, and this whole thing, why this is important, is this was arranged by Shep Proudfoot. Shep Proudfoot works at Jerry's car dealership as a mechanic, and he knows Gare and supposedly doesn't know Carl, and we will get to that later. There's a huge reveal that I'll give there later. But he does know Carl, and I'll tell you why I know that. But Gare and Carl, he really sets up Gare with Jerry, and then Carl gets wrangled in, and there's confusion like as to why Jerry is doing this deal. It just doesn't sound right from the jump, because Jerry's like, well, I'm going to pay you $40,000, and then I'm going to get $80,000 ransom for my wife after you kidnap her. And they're just like, you're like robbing Peter to pay Paul. Like, what the hell are you going to do? Like with 80 grand and then take half and then give us 40 grand and then you keep 40 grand. Like, that doesn't make sense at all. And then we come to find out that Jerry has a very rich father-in-law. And so while he's trying to explain himself, like Carl, Steve Buscemi, he's just like, fuck it, let's just do this thing. I don't know, man. You know, Shep didn't give us any details. I was confused from the get-go, but fuck it, let's just do it. Give me the damn keys. So then we're introduced to Wade, who is Jerry's father-in-law, and Wade doesn't like him, doesn't trust him, can't trust him any further than he can throw him. Jerry mentioned some parking lot deal he proposed to him, says he'll think about it. Hey, I sent you over the proposal to you and Stan Grossman. Did you guys get a chance to look at it? And he's just like ignoring him, watching the hockey game, and he's just like, okay, I'll think about it, whatever. And really, we're just getting this feeling that Jerry is just a lush. Like, he really just has not succeeded to the degree that he wanted to in life. Everything he has is because he married into a wealthy family, and so everything he has isn't his, from what we can tell. And so before we even get started into all of this, we get our first introduction of Shep Proudfoot, because the deal with his father-in-law might go through. And so now there's like, actually this deal, you know, we learned that Jerry's got multiple irons in the fire. We're like, this deal with his father might go through. He's going to look at the proposal with Stan Grossman, so I might not need the money. So I can call off the kidnapping, so I don't need to get the ransom money for my wife. But apparently he can't get a hold of these people. He can't get a hold of Carl. He can't get a hold of Gare. So he tries to go to Shep, the guy who set everything up. And he says, and I'll quote the scene, Jerry, say, Shep, how you doing there? Say, you know those two fellas you put me in touch with up there in Fargo? I put you in touch with Grimsrud. Yeah, well, he had a buddy there. Then I don't vouch for him. Well, that's okay. I vouch for Grimsrud. Who's his buddy? Carl something. Never heard of him. Don't vouch for him. Well, that's okay. He's a buddy of yours you vouch for, so I'm not worried. I was wondering, see, I got in touch with him. See, this deal I needed him for, I may not need him anymore. Something's happening, see? Call him up. Yeah, see, well, I did that, and I haven't been able to get him, so I thought maybe you know an alternate number or what have you. Nope. Okay, well, real good then. And that's it. That's all we see of Shep. Shep just says, nope. He says, well, call him up, and he's famous, then I don't vouch for him. Don't know him, never heard of him, don't vouch for him. And he's talking about Carl in that scene. And we learn really that, and people on YouTube, on Reddit forums, they quote that. Don't know him, don't vouch for him. They loved saying that. We learned that Jerry has multiple scams going. He got a $320,000 loan. Who knows what he's doing with the money, but on some phony serial numbers on cars. So he works at the dealership. He must have taken a lien on these like fake serial numbers, these fake VINs on these cars in his lot, and now they're trying to collect. They're like, okay, well, we need to make sure that the cars you're loaning against actually exist, and fax it over. You faxed it over, and they're not matching, so mail it over to us. And then so now like it's all starting to crumble, and he goes to Wade and Stan Grossman and talk about the parking lot, and they say, hey, it's a good idea. Want to move forward? They offer him a finder's fee. And that's when Jerry's like, no, I don't want a finder's fee. And you're like, Jerry wanted them to loan him $750,000. And they're just like, we're not a bank. Jerry, we're not a bank. And eventually Jerry's just like tail between his legs, and he's just, I don't know what plan he had crafted, but if he was actually going to build the parking lot with the $750,000, he actually had a good idea. He just got greedy. He just couldn't get out of his own way. He could have got 75 grand right there. Boom, done. Which is more than the ransom, well, just about the ransom money he was about to get. So it's never explained what trouble Jerry's in, but Jerry leaves disappointed. Following this, the kidnapping still happens because he could never get a hold of Carl and Gare. So they kidnap his wife, this intense, funny scene that ends with her like falling down the stairs wrapped in a shower curtain. And then following that kidnapping, Gare and Carl are pulled over by a cop. Carl tries to bribe, Steve Buscemi tries to bribe the cop, it goes awry, Gare ends up shooting the cop. And then after this murder, and after a murder of a couple of bystanders that saw them kill the car, move the body of the police officer, enter Marge, aka Margie Gunderson. She begins investigating the murder by, scoping out the scene like Columbo. But we also learn she's pregnant, 7 months pregnant. And she's a great character in this. She is killing it as a pregnant wife, working, supporting a stay-at-home father-to-be that we can tell who's Norm, who is a former police officer, turned really stay-at-home dad painter. And then, yeah, it's pretty cool to see that side of it. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen, like, this was progressive for 1996. One, to see a woman be a leading role, but her to be pregnant too, like to continue working and to, like, flip the roles where she's the one working still and the stay-at-home dad, which is, kind of a newer thing for that 1996. I thought that was a pretty cool thing to put on camera, and she did a great job. And she's like Columbo. She kind of plays dumb or appears not as intelligent on camera, but she's a great police officer, great investigator, so she kills it. And then she finds out eventually, like, hey, there's these dealer plates that that the police officer took note of before he got shot. Let's go figure this out. So flash to Jerry trying to tell his father-in-law, like, they kidnapped my wife. They want $1 million. Even though he told the kidnappers 80 grand. So we're just like, what the hell is Jerry doing? Jerry said, they explicitly said, no cops, no cops. And his father-in-law wants to get the money, and, their poor son. They're just like, what about Johnny? What's going to happen to him? And it's a mess. But Carl and Gare eventually take Jerry's wife up to the cabin where they are holding up until they get money from Jerry. Or until they get word from Jerry Lundegaard. They're like, hey, the ransom money, here you go. So Margie ends up getting a lead that sends her to the Blue Ox. Because Carl and Gare, that night that they met Jerry, they ended up hooking up with a couple of women. And this is the famous exchange, Le Soeur, go Bears, that one. Really demonstrating the accent of the area. I'm not going to try to do it anymore. It's probably painful. Probably painful to listen to. But why this interview is significant is because it ties and eventually brings in Shep again, because Marge learns that the kidnappers went up to the Twin Cities. They went up to Minneapolis, which helps the investigation because Jerry gets contacted by Carl and the kidnappers again. And Margie gets some numbers from the Blue Ox. They look at the payphones, and they see that Carl had called a couple of people from the payphone, a trucking company and a private residence in Minneapolis, which was Shep Proudfoot. And it's interesting when Marge and Norm are eating at a breakfast, diner. One of the other police officers comes in and gives her the numbers and says, like, hey, we ran those numbers from the Blue Ox, from the payphone. She's like, one is for a trucking company and the other is for a Shep Proudfoot. And Margie says, oh, what? And the cop handed her the letter and says, hey, Shep Proudfoot, that's a name. letting people know that's not a common name. You know, it's not from the area that everybody knows. Really setting the stage that, like, this person, while we never say Shep Proudfoot is from a reservation, is Indian, is native, or says anything explicitly that makes him native, he has long hair, he's brown, and his last name is Proudfoot, which on the nose just doesn't seem like a regular name you come across. And so, but somehow everybody in this movie knew he was native. I thought that was the awesome thing about this, is because it's clear that he's not from the community that where everybody knows everybody. So she goes to investigate in Twin Cities, eventually learns that Shep works at the dealership where Jerry works. She's going to go check it out. She finds him and interviews him. And this is the second of 3 scenes where Shep is in the movie. So Margie says, "So, do you remember getting a phone call late Wednesday night?" Shep: "Nope." "You reside there at 1425 Fremont Terrace?" "Yes." "Anyone else residing there?" "No." "Well, Mr. Proudfoot, this call came in past 3 in the morning. It's just hard for me to believe you don't remember anyone calling. Now, I know you've had some problems struggling with the narcotics, some other entanglements, currently on parole." "So?" "Well, associating with criminals, if you're the one they talk to, that right there would be a violation of your parole. You would end up back in Stillwater. I saw some rough stuff on your priors, but nothing like homicide. I know you don't want to be an accessory to something like that." "So, you think you might remember the folks who we were that called you?" Flashback to Carl, and that was it. It's kind of just like left open. And this is significant because Shep knows that Carl ratted him out. Carl got him in trouble because he called him. So you flash back to Carl in the cabin, and he's just like going crazy in the cabin. He's just, "I got to get some action, man. I'm going to the Twin Cities." And so he does. He ends up leaving, and he finds a hooker. He goes out with her. It has this, hilarious scene that builds up to him trying to find out, so we find your line of work interesting kind of stuff. And just trying to, Carl's just an interesting person. He's not cut out for this kind of work, but he's got into this mess. And eventually they hook up. And what's interesting is when they're in the Twin Cities, he is in Carl's place. So this scene, this is right before the ass-kicking scene, so I'm going to set the stage here. There's a lot of debate around Coen Brothers lovers of movies, of people who love their movies, as to, did Shep know Carl? Did he just go in there and bait up a random person? Did he actually know Carl? Because at the beginning of the movie, he says, I don't know him, I don't vouch for him. But, and this is why it's important you talk to everybody, I found a deep podcast interview that'll, only had a couple hundred listens, downloads on YouTube. And this guy interviewed Steve Reevis, I want to say in early 2017, right before his passing. And Steve Reevis talked about the ass-kicking scene, and he said that the motivation that he was given by Joel Coen really helps a lot of this. So Shep did serve time in Stillwater, and he knows Carl from Stillwater. And that's the backstory that he gives to Steve Reevis as he's standing there. And he tells Steve, "Okay, this is your room. Since this is your room, you are surprised to find Carl in your room. On top of that, you find him with a woman in your room." And that's the motivation that he gave to Steve to harness anger on screen, to just beat the shit out of Steve Buscemi, basically. So it is, they did know each other. And Steve Reevis did say that the backstory between Shep and Carl is that they served time together in Stillwater Prison. And so at the beginning of the movie, he was playing smart when he said, "Don't know him, don't vouch for him." He's just like, "Hey, Carl, I don't even want to be associated with that guy. That guy's bad news. I know Gare. That's about all I'm going to vouch for." And so what's interesting is nobody ever, every forum, every article I went down, every YouTube, rabbit hole I tried to go down to find out, did they actually know each other? Did Shep, go and find Carl? What was that all about? For some reason, Carl broke into or had a key to, and that's where I think because they knew each other, Carl got into Shep's place in Minneapolis, and that's where he took the hooker back to, and that's where they were having sex. And so Shep wasn't looking for Carl. He just went home and Carl was there having sex with a woman. And so that's why he rips him off. That's why he rips him off that lady, and Shep was just like, or freaking Carl, Steve Buscemi was like, Shep, what the hell you doing? I was banging that girl. And then Shep just tears into him. You fucking asshole, get the fuck out of here. Send me back to Stillwater. Get the fuck out of here. Throws him over the sofa while he's butt naked. And after that, he's making all kinds of noise. The neighbor comes to tell him to keep it down. He gets over and grabs that neighbor in the hallway, just throwing him back and forth in the hallway. And then the hooker, the escort, goes running down out of the hall, out of the room, just closing her arms, still butt naked. He just like kicks her out of the, get the hell out of here. And so this is the one reveal. This next part is the one reveal where we learn that for sure he is native because of what Carl says to him. As Shep is standing in the hallway, the neighbor, he already beat the shit out of him. The hooker ran out in the street yelling, animals, animals. And so now it's just Shep and Carl left in the room. And as he's charging toward Carl, Carl braces for impact. He blurts out, hey, stay away from me, man. Hey, smoke a fucking peace pipe. Don't you dare hit me. And it's not an appropriate thing to say, but Steve Buscemi's character, that's exactly, that's in line with his character. He just can't shut the hell up. He needs to always say something. He always has to get a word in. He's about to get his ass kicked by an angry native guy, and he has to say something that's probably going to make him more angry. And while it's ignorant, it works, and it just does work. And it's not just left alone. I mean, Shep goes and beats the shit out of him for it. And and we all know someone like that. I thought that was cool. And then there was an ultimate Pootie Tang moment because Shep rips off Carl's belt because Carl was butt naked. He just put his pants back on. And he has no shirt on at this point. He rips his belt off in one motion, and then he takes him and starts choking him to lift him off the ground. And then he begins whipping the shit out of him with the buckle, leaving the huge welts on his cuts on his back, and while yelling every combination of fuck you could possibly think of. And it's just a great scene. And that's the last we ever see of Shep Proudfoot. And why this is cool too is while he's only in this entire movie for 3 scenes, Shep is critical to this story. Without Shep, this movie doesn't happen. He's the one that connects Jerry and Gare together to start this whole debacle. And also, at this point, he's the accelerant that gets Carl, Steve Buscemi, to do what he does next. Because for the rest of the movie, he just got the shit beat out of him. He's limping like crazy. He's just mad. He's aggravated at this point. He's just like, Jerry, give me the fucking money. Jerry, give me the money. No more screwing around, man. I want the ransom now. I don't want half. I want all of it. And he's just mad. And it's because of the ass kicking he got from Shep. And so he ends up demanding the money. And Wade, Jerry's father-in-law, is just like, Jerry, you're a freaking mess. You're a liability. I'm going to take care of this myself. I don't want you anywhere near this. You're just going to hose it up. So Wade goes over there, and they ended up having this standoff because Gare's like, no, Gene, no money. Or Wade, no, Gene, no money. And then Carl's just like, screw this old man, and just shoots him. Shoots him, kills Wade, takes the money, but not before he gets shot in the face. It's pretty crazy scene. But Jerry, he tries to get his wits about himself, and he's like, I can stop this. He tries to go after Wade, but by the time he gets there, Carl already killed his father-in-law. So what does Jerry do? Instead of calling the cops, trying to fess up, he stuffs his father-in-law in his trunk, and he tries to take off. So through some more investigating, when the police learn that something's going on at Moose Lake, the cabin where Carl and Gare are staying, because Steve Buscemi and Carl kept yapping about, Carl kept yapping about, and he was going crazy up by the lake, while he was looking for an escort. So Steve Buscemi tried to pull a fast one on Gare, and he now has $1 million. He realizes, holy crap, there's $1 million here. So he takes out $80,000, which was the original ransom, because Gare has no idea that the $1 million was given to him. And he goes and buries the money in the snow. And he's like, all right, I'm going to, do the drop off, and then I'm going to come back and take this money and get the hell out of town. He goes back to the cabin, tries to lie to Gare about it, but Gare ends up killing him because he wouldn't give him the car. I don't know why he wouldn't give him that stupid brown car. He already had a truck. He could have just taken the truck, got the money, got out of town. And the last time we hear Shep Proudfoot's name is Carl says to Gare, if you ever see your friend Shep Proudfoot, tell him I'm going to nail his ass. And then tries to leave, but Gare ends up killing him, puts him in the wood chipper. And Margie's on the way to the cabin to go figure out what's going on because she just has a hunch about the cabin after everyone keeps talking about it by Moose Lake, and then eventually goes by Jerry's office just one more time, and then Jerry panics, lies to her, says he's going to go do a count because she believes that the dealer vehicle at the beginning of the movie belonged to that dealership, and he flees the interview. And then Margie takes off to the cabin, eventually finds that Gare has been killed Carl, put him in the wood chipper. You just see this hilarious, I love that how they did this scene because you don't actually see this gory, yeah, it's already done, it's bloody and everything, but you just see this from the shin up foot, left in the wood chipper. And yeah, so Margie ends up shooting Gare, and then the cops end up going after Jerry Lundegaard, and he's in Bismarck. I don't know why he didn't leave North Dakota. He couldn't have kept driving. I don't understand what that was all about, but with one of the most saddest, most pathetic movie scenes in history, just crying his eyes out, face down, showing his true colors of who he really is, and just pathetic, a pathetic person trying to pull the wool over everybody's eyes, thinking he's smarter than he really is. And the movie ends, essentially. And Margie has a last scene with Norm. They're cuddling in bed, talking about how he won the artwork for the 3-cent stamp. And so really that's it. I wanted to just really talk about Shep. The Coen Brothers, let's go to the positives. The Coen Brothers casted Steve Reevis because of one line. Smoke a fucking peace pipe. That's the only indication that you get in this entire movie that Shep is Native American. They didn't need to hire an actual native. I would honestly have given him a pass if they did that, but they did. In 1996, the standards, where the bar was, they didn't have to do that, but they did that. They could have hired an ethnically ambiguous person, but they didn't, so that's a positive. I love that somehow they managed to get somebody, nobody calls him native, nobody says, he only talks English. At no point does he speak any other language other than English. He isn't on a reservation. He doesn't say that. At no point is reservation dropped. He lives in Minneapolis. He has an apartment. It's not like he lives back on the res in a freaking double wide trailer or a broken down shack, which is kind of what most of the stories are. But it's how did they do that? How did two white guys manage to get native representation right, that we just live in the world? That's how you portray natives. You don't need to put a giant sign over them and make it known hey, let's put some let's put some beads on him. Let's put a feather in his hair. Let's give him a Pendleton jacket. You don't need to do that. We have jobs, we live in cities, and unfortunately we go to prison sometimes, but this was progress, This was a spin on the stoic Indian. And that was another positive. The first two scenes, you think hey, Shep is the stoic Indian. He never speaks more than a few words at a time, never expresses emotion, rarely makes eye contact, until the epic ass kicking that he lays down, which he is most famous for. What's crazy about Shep Proudfoot is he's the favorite character of a lot of people in Coen Brothers movies that have the most iconic of characters, the dude and H.I. He has great characters. These brothers have great characters in all of their movies. Walter from The Big Lebowski. But Shep Proudfoot is one of the most memorable because of a crazy ass kicking he delivers to Steve Buscemi. Numerous people online, Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, Reddit, they say Shep is their favorite character. And I saw people too just following hashtags, people name their dogs and cats Shep Proudfoot. No joke. No joke. As for the negatives, people do name their cat and dogs after Shep Proudfoot, so some ignorant shit can happen. I think this is a prime example of no matter what you do on screen, it's up to the audience's interpretation to tell you whether or not it's accurate. Because this is a loved character, there's a lot of ignorant comments. And because it was a funny line that was delivered in the movie, There's going to be a lot of ignorant comments. When people heard that Steve Reevis passed away, YouTube videos and really YouTube videos that reenact like of just clips of that scene where he beats him up in the room, and then also like obituary videos on YouTube. People will say stupid stuff like, I hope he's smoking a peace pipe in heaven. Ton of upvotes. The scene where he's kicking Steve Buscemi's ass, like that's the one that gets me. It's like there, and I quote, Carl should have flashed a bottle of firewater. That's their kryptonite. Ton of upvotes. Like hardly any, nobody says like, hey, you shouldn't say that. Hey, that's wrong. Like somebody put there, yeah, somebody said that to be funny. But like that's where people's mind goes, you know. Another one. Those people loved them some booze. Should have given him some alcohol, and maybe he would have spared him. Ton of upvotes. There's no policing of those comments, those statements on YouTube, and I think that's where the problem is with stuff like this. It's like the representation is just allowed to be made into whatever it is by the audience. And so back to the pets, because some people name their pets Shep Proudfoot. I mean, Jesus. I saw on Instagram, I went down a hashtag thread of Shep Proudfoot. I went and searched that, and then I eventually, was just scrolling through, seeing what was happening. I found somebody had put a headdress. I mean, it was a commercial fake headdress. They put it on their pet because their dog's name was Shep Proudfoot. And I was just like, nobody had any problems with it, And this was like in America, I think. I don't know where it was, but, it's just like, gosh, what the hell? And I don't know why they made this person native. This is a negative for me. While it was a positive, they hired an actual native for the smoke a fucking peace pipe line. Why a native? You could have just made him a random minority, or even just a random white person, a menacing looking white person. There was no reason to make him native other than to have the payoff and the dialogue of smoke a fucking peace pipe. There's zero improvisation in Coen Brothers movies, so they deliberately put that line in this movie, knowing in their head, we're going to cast a Native American for that one piece of dialogue, for that payoff, So, at that point, it's just like, we're not allowed to tell our stories, we're just a prop in somebody else's story, and that's kind of how that felt, or Fargo feels. But it's way different in the TV show in Fargo Season 2, which Zahn McClarnon actually knew Steve Reevis. They both have attested and said that they knew each other, in the early 90s. They used to hang out a lot in the early 90s in LA, and Zahn McClarnon said that he drew inspiration from Shep Proudfoot, from that role, from Steve Reevis's role. And in an interview with the New York Times, that's where he said, like, yeah, we're old friends. We go back a long time. So while they aren't connected directly in terms of like timeline, the two native actors, they have connections with each other because they know each other. And native acting, just like Indian country, is a small world. So it's pretty cool to see that. And I will do eventually Fargo Season 2 because Hansi Dent is just a force. He's just a badass. He might be one of my favorite maybe the favorite TV native character, of all time, just because he's such a force. He says so much without saying anything, and he's just a badass. Like, he's like a bounty hunter. It's so cool to have a like impervious native person on television. It's so cool. I'm going to figure out how I'm going to do that. I might just end up doing a Hansi Dent episode and just review just him and kind of remove it from the storyline, or kind of just like talk to the storyline very ambiguously. Kind of how I did this one. If I did this like a regular episode, it would be like an hour and a half long, but I just wanted to focus on the points where, Shep Proudfoot was in the movie. So, final thoughts. Great representation. Did you know that he was native? Yes. He was just a regular guy. That's what we are. We don't need to be drinking, Like, he just reminded me of a bunch of relatives that I have, minus the ass-kicking scene. And then unless they really get into it and drink a lot, then yeah, the ass-kicking scene's probably relevant. But really, he just existed. That's just how they are, I could have maybe spared the fact that he was an ex-con, and still a criminal, the only minority in the film. So there were two minorities, and the other minority was the neighbor to Shep Proudfoot, the black guy that gets beat up by Shep. But you know what? I'll take it. Shep was the center of the movie. Without Shep Proudfoot, this movie doesn't happen. You know, he was the connection between Jerry Lundegaard and Carl and Gare that got this whole thing started. So awesome. You know, I still think it was cool that he had long hair and Proudfoot, quote unquote, sounds native. So they were like, yeah, he's native. You know, and then the peace pipeline that solidified him that he is native. I'm sure people wondered, like, is this a real life depiction? And because in real life, we get the, oh man, I thought you were native, but I wasn't sure. For me personally, Ian being Navajo, people tell me that when they eventually find out that I'm Navajo, they're like, it's always a surprise of like, oh, I thought you were, or I wasn't going to assume. And I thought that was pretty cool that they got that really kind of part right. So, and this is where I will ask the listeners. I have never heard a native person have the last name Proudfoot. I will also say that I'm from the Southwest. I've seen people here in the Southwest have the last name Proudfoot, and they're all white people. Is Proudfoot actually a native name? I looked it up online. I couldn't find any native person with the last name Proudfoot. I saw it had like Scottish descent, or it was like a Scottish last name. I don't know why they didn't pick a more like on the nose. I mean, Shep Proudfoot. If there's like a large community of native people in, you know, the North Dakota area that have the last name Proudfoot, that blows my mind. But I couldn't find one person with the last name Proudfoot. I don't know if that's just a name they came up with. They were like, yeah, that sounds about right. But they didn't choose like the equivalent of Yazi or Begay for Navajo people. Like I would have thought they would have done that, but you know, I think that's expecting too much from a couple of, you know, non-native brother directors. But yeah, so real quick, I'll close with like a real quick Steve Reevis bio. In that same interview that he talked about, he gave a little bit of his background, how he got started in acting. So he got his start because of the movie War Party. He went to go to an audition. He was working at a gas station in Lawrence, Kansas. He went home to Browning, Montana, where he's from, and he went to go audition, but didn't get any parts. But he could ride a horse like nobody's business. But they needed horseback riders for kind of stunt actors, so that's what he did, and that's how he got his start. And then eventually got on with Dances with Wolves, and now this one, Fargo. Then eventually The Longest Yard. So he said that the two roles people recognized him on the street for the most were this role as Shep Proudfoot and the other as Babyface, gosh, I can't remember his last name, in The Longest Yard as the commentator alongside Chris Berman. So, yeah, Steve auditioned, he said, for Fargo. He auditioned once and later got called back. And then in the second time, he met the Coen Brothers and they said, yeah, welcome on board, sir. Like, let's do it. Let's make a movie. So, all right, that was it. This is a really short episode, shorter for me anyway. Rest in peace, Steve Reevis. Hell of an actor. I wish you could have seen more of him on camera. It's unfortunate. In that interview, I had heard that he was really trying to gear up to get back into more acting roles. He was on like a 2.5-year hiatus at the time of that podcast interview, and it's just unfortunate, you know, whenever we see one of our indigenous family members leave us, but also especially when they were so pivotal in accurate and key and advancing representation on screen. So once again, R.I.P. Steve Reevis, and I'm going to be doing upcoming episodes on Hostels and Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and I think I'm going to do Fargo Season 2 and The Liberator. The Liberators before the year is over. And then obviously the Moment in History, I'm still going to try to do that with Charlie Hill, but I'm going to try to get an interview lined up for that one. Somebody who may have known Charlie Hill. So we'll see how that goes. All right, everybody. Talk to you later.